So have you ever felt really let down and disappointed because you kind of had an expectation that your husband would have realized that perhaps you were unwell and that they could have done something to help you out, or that it was a special day for you and they could have remembered? What I found that is when we understand about our separate realities, that we're better able to navigate through those moments without experiencing the sadness, the loneliness, the frustration, anger, all the other emotions that go with having an expectation that isn't met by our spouse, by our husband. So over the years, as I've been working with Muslim women, and we've had this topic come up. In fact, we even gave it a label called divorce thinking, because it often went down the path of, well, what's the point? Might as well, this marriage isn't working, right? And so we labeled it divorce thinking. And, there was a time when I had one particular student, and I'm not going to, give away her personal details, but use her story as an example. So she actually wanted her husband to do a favor for her. She wanted him, when he was traveling across the border to the next country, to visit his sister and collect, I think it was hot dogs and burgers, something like that. Seemed like an odd request to him, and because of whatever reasons, he said, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to take that extra bag with me. I don't want the extra clutter. And so from her perspective, it looked like he really didn't care, that he really didn't care about her and the kids, because in fact, they really loved hot dogs and burgers. And in fact, they couldn't get them in the country they were in, that the only way they could get them was when they were visiting her family. And so from her perspective, she really felt like he didn't care, that he really was indifferent to her needs, and the children's needs in this case, and that definitely had a little bit of divorce thinking going on there. In listening to her talk about it, she went on to say another thing, which gave me a little bit of a clue about the separate realities here. She said, and you know what? When I bring them back, we have a barbecue, he uses them all up in one go, not realizing that, it's going to be ages before we can get them again, and that we all really love them. No, I wish he wouldn't do that. And it twigged. You know what? Maybe he doesn't realize that that's the issue, because he's not the one that does the shopping. So I said to her, is there a possibility that he doesn't actually realize that you can't get them locally, and that this is the only way you can get them, and that you and the kids really love them? She thought about it and went, I'm not sure. I said, maybe check. So she went to him, explained about the fact that they couldn't get them from anywhere else. And subhanAllah, he was quite then happy to go and get the sausages and the burgers. So it was very much what we call a separate reality moment. And today I want to teach you about separate realities, because most of the time, if we have a relationship that isn't a bad relationship, so generally it's a good relationship, but we just feel like our needs aren't being met, or we're not having our expectations met in the relationship, it may well be a separate realities thing going on. And then in fact, what's going on doesn't actually mean what we think it means. And I've seen this and witnessed this over and over again while coaching Muslim sisters, alhamdulillah, and even in my own situations too. So how separate realities works is everything I teach you comes from, we're living in the thinking, well, we're living in the feelings that come from our thought in the moment and nowhere else. So we're always experiencing our thoughts. We're always feeling our thoughts. And that being the case, that being the truth of our human experience, which it is, it means that every single individual on this planet is having their own thinking, their own thoughts about any situation. And so therefore they're having their own experience of it. So even right now, all of you who have joined me here live, or all of you who have joined here in the recording, even though you're hearing my words, exactly the same words, will be experiencing them differently, because you'll have different thinking about them. Different things will pop into your mind about what I'm saying. You will have all gone through different experiences. You would all have different challenges. And so while what I am saying is the same for everybody, your experience of it is completely different. And it's no different in marriage. Your husband cannot have your thoughts, and you cannot have his thoughts. You cannot get into each other's heads, even if you have the most amazing relationship where you really get along and you really understand each other extremely well. You will still have separate realities. Even in the times where you're on the same page, you might be on the same page, but you're not having exactly the same words on that page. That's one way of looking at it anyway. So what this means is, actually, we're not able to know exactly what's going on in another person's mind. We are only guessing or making assumptions when we see their behavior and we put a story around it based on our own thinking. So this might sound a bit crazy, but I see it in myself and others all the time, where we think they're thinking this, and so we think this about the fact that they're thinking that. And guess what? We don't actually know what they're thinking. We made all of that up. And in the process of making all of that up, we got all worked up and disappointed or upset, or whatever the emotion is, around what they're thinking or what they're not thinking, and what all of that, and all of the story that we created in our own mind about it, instead of actually checking in with them and seeing if there's a reason why. There's a reason why they didn't remember it was an important day, or the reason why when they saw us, looking sick, that they didn't think, oh, maybe I could do the dishes, or maybe I could look after the kids for a bit so she could get a rest. All the things that we often get upset about and hold on to, and then get more upset and frustrated about. So here's the thing. When we understand separate realities, it gives us an opportunity to realize that perhaps there's a different story around what's going on than the one that we just created, because we just created that from our own imagination. And that if we were to actually have a conversation with the person from a neutral space, meaning that we haven't made up a story about it and got all upset, and say to them, did you realize that I was really sick today? Or actually come up to them and go, you know what, I'm really sick and I really need a break. Do you think you could just look after the kids for a couple of hours so I can just have a rest, see if I can get better? We think that they should know intuitively that that's what we need from them, and not realizing that perhaps they've had a huge day at work, or they've got something else on their mind. And it's not that they don't care. And it's not that they haven't noticed. It's that they haven't connected the dots, because their brain is trying to fix something else or work something else out, and they're distracted. And yes, it might mean that they're not being as thoughtful as they could be, but it doesn't mean that they don't care. It just means that their mind is busy elsewhere, perhaps. That's another possible scenario. And when we come and ask in a genuine, non-emotional way, could you please help? I'm really sick. They snap out of their thinking and can come and be helpful, inshallah. So we often get worked up about, well, I shouldn't have to say that. Well, why shouldn't we have to say that? Why do we expect them to know in any given moment what we need if we haven't expressed it. Just as much as we don't know what's going on in their head, therefore we can't make stories around that. They don't know what's going on in our head either. And by assuming that they're supposed to work that out without us telling them, we're actually making it very difficult for them to show up in the way that we expect. So we create these expectations on them that, oh, they need to meet these needs in order to be a good husband, you know, our own kind of definitions and expectations that we have in our own head. But if they don't know about those and they're not aware of them, they may well let us down without even knowing that that's what's going on. And so then when we're in this stormy mood and we expect that they should know why we're in a stormy mood, they're completely confused. They have no idea. And we're actually being a bit unfair by expecting them to get it without us expressing things in a proper way. So what do we do about all of this, right? And what if I've said this to him before and he still doesn't get it? There's a couple of things there. Let's do the what if I've said it before. Most likely, before you heard this, when you said it before, you said it from an emotional place. You've probably said it in a fed up way because you've only spoken up when it's got to the point where it's really become too much. And so there's emotion in your voice, and the way you've said it, even though it might not have been meant this way, may have come across like judgment and criticism. And so imagine from the other side, if it's come across as a judgment or a criticism that they haven't met your needs, what's their reaction going to be? They're going to have a defensive reaction. And often that defensive reaction can be angry, which we then think is more injustice, or that defensive reaction could be in retreating. And then we feel like, well, that's more injustice again because we've just asked for their help and now they've gone in the opposite direction running, right? That's the difference, is because we've got to the point where we're emotional when we're communicating to them, that they then receive that message, not in the way we intended it, but in the way they've received it and they've interpreted it. And it's come across like we're criticizing, that they're not good enough. And how do we feel if someone says something where we jump to the conclusion they're saying we're not good enough? We feel defensive too, right? We want to try and justify ourselves or do something to get them to see it from our point of view. So the difference is when we can see that potentially it's a separate reality and we can actually say it from a very neutral and calm space. And when we can say it like that, they can receive it the way it's intended, because there's not the emotion behind it that confuses the message. The message comes through straightforward and they have an opportunity to receive it that way and respond to it from that space, inshallah. I'm not saying that this is going to be perfect every time, by the way. I'm just trying to explain how it's all working so you can have a different view, a different perspective on it all. There's one other thing. Said two things. Yeah, so I think I've answered them both in the same thing, is that how can we experience it differently? How can we do it differently? So when we have an emotional response to it, is give ourselves a moment to allow that to settle before we say or do anything. That if we're going to say or do something from that emotional state, then it's not likely to get us the results we're looking for.